Are you ready to have the confidence of a documented plan? Your financial journey documented, laid out, not to guarantee what could happen or will happen, but to give you a strategy to deal with the uneventful things along the way. Get an idea of where you are by going to yourlifeafterwork.com or calling us at 800-928-4001. A team at the Financial Enhancement Group will sit down with you. They'll invest 90 minutes in your financial future, give you things to consider today, things to consider in the future, and if you choose to partner together with the Financial Enhancement Group, they'll tell you what they're going to do for you and they'll put it into writing. Again, go to yourlifeafterwork.com or call 800-928-4001. Get signed up for your Next Steps meeting today. Well, good morning and welcome back to your Retirement Playbook. I'm your host, Joe Clark. Happy to have you along. Hey, we are talking about your typical financial journey. You started at some point in time in life, begin to accumulate money, put money into accounts. You typically, in today's era, you typically put money in one of those three areas or a combination of them. A 401k if you worked for a company that's for profit, a 403b if you worked for a not-for-profit like a hospital or a teacher. Those are probably the two biggest 403bs. And you may or may not use an IRA along the way. For those of you that don't have access to one of the 401ks or the 403bs, you probably only have access to an IRA. This is the world of what we call defined contribution plans, where you define the contribution you're going to put in. The limits that you can put in are dependent on whether you're 50 and older or under 50 years of age, and they vary for each of the plans. Remember, the first two, 401ks and 403bs, are deemed Department of Labor plans, so they've got entirely different rules and regulations than the IRA does, which is not a Department of Labor plan. Now, it's important to understand that because there are some decisions that you make along the way. The theme of this show is that you're trying to create the typical financial journey. And I would like to say it's uneventful. I use the analogy of a 34-year marriage that I've had with Barb over the last 34 years, obviously. And I can say that it's time has flown by. I don't remember a time of not being married. I can remember particular events. I can remember occurrences on the football team and wrestling team and debate, that I had before Barb. But for most of my life, all of my emotions and memories, it's been as a husband of one and a daddy of two, of Kaylee and Kendra, and that's how my life is. Your financial journey has a lot of those events that you can go back and think about, but that journey, a typical financial journey, you want to be remembered as uneventful. You started and you arrived. You finished the job successfully. We know that there's going to be things that happen along the way, and most of us resonate with market volatility that are listening to this show because you think about the tech wreck and the pandemic and 08 and 09 and things of that nature. But there are other things that happen in our lives where you just have to back the car up. Something happens to one of our children or to our spouse or to ourselves. Something happens with the company that we work at. And we have a plan and we know where it is that we're trying to go, but something changes and we have to back the car up, right? That can happen a lot in the financial world. And as you know, we talk about the family focus process. That's our trademarked proprietary process we have at the Financial Enhancement Group that helps you document your financial vision and then goes through those 5 critical elements. All 5 things individually, in my opinion, can wreck your retirement, right? Can wreck your financial future. It takes all 5 of them working in a cohesive fashion. Your life after work, or what some would call the retirement plan, the annual tax plan, the investment playbook, the life happens, good, bad, and ugly, that come along once or twice in a lifetime, and then last but not least, the legacy plan. How do I give it to the next generation, or how do I use it when I can no longer care for myself? Those are what we call the 5 critical elements, part of that family focus process that is trademarked. Well, one of the very frequent conversations that we have is when somebody has a 401k or a 403b and it's time to separate from service, it's time for them to leave or retire, it may or may not make sense for them to roll the money out of the 401k or the 403b into their individual IRA. Now notice I said it may or may not make sense. If you're taking money from a 401k plan that is deeply regulated by the federal government, and you're moving it into a private annuity because your friend, and go back and read my article where I talked about the different types of trust, character trust and competency trust, before you do anything like that. But when you go back in and you make the decision to move it out of a 401k to invest it in a commissionable based annuity with a surrender period of any type, I would really, really question that. I'm not a big fan of rules and regulations, but sometimes it makes sense to keep people from making bad decisions. If you're moving it to a fiduciary, a registered investment advisor that has a documented process, and it makes sense to move money from the 401k or 403b into an IRA, that is a different story. We help people do it all the time where it makes sense. And believe me, it doesn't always make sense. 401ks do have advantages that IRAs don't, especially if you retire younger. One, if you're 55, most 401k plans will let you access money without a 10% federal penalty if you are fully retired, whereas in an IRA, you have to be 59 and a half. With an IRA, with an IRA, they can make anybody they want as their beneficiary. If your husband has or your spouse has the IRA and they want to make their brother their beneficiary, they can. In a 401k, you as the spouse have to sign off and allow for that to occur. They can't just make that choice on their own. The advantages to the IRA obviously are very clear, and that's that you have an unlimited amount of investment choices. But again, if you're just trusting your friend because you go to church with them, or as your nephew or your neighbor, there's a difference between character trust and competency trust. If you just make that decision to put it in a commissionable-based product, it's probably not in your best interest, in my opinion. Every now and then, however, you have to back the car up. Think about the financial journey that we're on, right? Every now and then something changed, and you've got to back the course up. I'm a member of Ed Slott's Master Elite IRA program. I was on the board for 10 years, one of the founders of the program. And instead of going into this myself, I'm just going to share some of the stuff that Ian Berger, he's an attorney and one of the leaders of the group, shared in one of his blog posts. And it's essentially titled, When a Reverse Rollover Makes Sense. If you want the whole document, just email us. Go to yourlifeafterwork.com and just request it, and we'll be happy to get you the article. But what Ian says is usually rollovers involving 401 accounts and IRAs involve moving dollars from a plan to an IRA. That is true. Sometimes it makes sense to do the reverse rollover. That's to back the car up, if you will. Also keep in mind, we do help people with separation in-service non-hardship distributions, or before you quit work, if you're over a certain age, your plan likely allows for you to be able to take money out of your 401k and put it in a self-directed IRA. We do that a lot for people, again, where it makes sense. Back to Ian's article. Let's get some bad news out of the way. Although 401ks and other company plans are required to allow rollovers out of the plan, this is critical. They are not required to allow rollovers into the plan. Now, why does this become so important? Well, you'll hear people make broad-based statements. I've heard attorneys say that you can leave your IRA to a trust, and then the trust can take care of the beneficiary designations. The technical answer is that is legally accurate. It's just the custodians have to agree to accept it, and in many cases they don't. Well, if the law is right, but the application is wrong, does it matter? We still have to deal with what is, not what ought to be, right? And so when somebody says a 401k, you can borrow money out, that is a rule the Department of Labor does indeed allow, but not all 401k plans, mine included, allow for loans. So you have to be aware of that. So before withdrawing your IRA, check with your plan administrator at HR to make sure you can do a reverse rollover. Makes sense. Also, the tax code only allows reverse rollovers of pre-tax or deductible IRA funds. You cannot re-roll Roth IRA money. There would be a reason to do that for creditor or bankruptcy protection, perhaps. Most of the time, that's okay, but Roth money is not eligible. So why bother with a reverse rollover? The main reason is to avoid getting hit by the pro rata rule if you're converting traditional IRA tax funds to a Roth IRA or a backdoor Roth IRA conversion. Now, I'm proud to take credit. I get it from people at the slot thing. In the slot group, I helped create the concept of the back door, especially using multiple IRAs, things that on the Roth conversions, things that we did that you can't do anymore. The backdoor Roth IRA is very, very much a tax process where you put money into a non-deductible IRA, you get no deduction, but then you immediately convert it to a Roth IRA. You're allowed to do that, perfectly legal and legitimate. The pro rata rule that Ian speaks of is that if you have $1 million in an IRA and you're doing a back door of a $7,000 if you're over 50 contribution, only the $7,000 goes into the million. Only that small percentage of it is a tax-free action. The rest of it, pro-ratally, is taxable as you were doing a Roth conversion from the big IRA into the Roth. So you have to be very, very careful here. If the $1 million in your IRA, however, had come from a 401k, and your 401k plan allows for you to do reverse rollovers, this is a time where you may want to back the car up, take the money out of your IRA, that $1 million, roll it back into the 401k, and that would then let you do the Roth backdoor contribution and not have to worry about any tax issues or the pro rata rule. Now, there's an awful lot that goes into this. It's not a simple decision. When you look at the 5 critical elements, you have to weigh them each, not just independently, but collectively in order to make a decision. Do not get caught up in the silo thinking that so many people do in their financial plan, where they only look at, do I take Social Security or not? Do I retire or not? Do I buy a second home or not? Do I move or not? Those are all individual big decisions, but they have a collective impact to your retirement. Doing a reverse rollover may make sense, but you need to understand and be able to weigh out all of the factors and make sure that you understand the pro rata rule. I'm not going to be able to hit all of this today, and this is not me trying to tease you. I'm more than happy to share the article, but just some things to go to deal with. Required beginning dates. If you leave your job at 55, I already hit that one. If the plan allows you to borrow from the 401k, but you can never borrow from an IRA. Administrative investment 401k expenses can be lower in a 401k than an IRA. Not always, but they can be. There's a lot of reasons to consider this. If you'd like to know more, just go to yourlifeafterwork.com. Say, hey, I'd like the article on the reverse rollover. See if it makes sense for you. Certainly something that my planning team considers when they sit down with you to do your family update. Go to yourlifeafterwork.com. Get signed up for a Next Steps meeting. We will cover this with you and the many other available financial tools that are in your box that make your journey uneventful.